Okay, let's get this evening underway. Welcome everyone to our final training event of the academic year. I'm Julie Tennille, Project Director for EPIC. There's lots of excitement about tonight's webinar on a sharpened approach to service delivery, integrating a motivational interviewing framework. As a member of the International Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers known as the MINT, we want to send a special welcome to our global MINT members attending tonight. As always, I am truly grateful for our EPIC team, including Wendy Myers, our grant program coordinator, Sarah Franciotti, our research assistant, and Ryan Brasa, our graduate assistant. Some important information about tonight's event. First, your video and microphone are automatically off since this is a webinar. You can enter questions or comments for the presenters in the Q&A box or the chat, and we'll be opening that chat periodically throughout the presentation when they are eliciting your responses. Second, log in with your full name for attendance credit. If you need to change your name, click on the 3 dots that are in the upper right corner of your personal window. And finally, and I want you to listen really, really closely to this one, if you want CEUs or a certificate of attendance, you are required to attend the entire training and complete a certificate request form while the event is still live, meaning that you have to stick around for that link that's available at the end of the presentation tonight, just before 8 o'clock. At the end of the post-test. So I want to be really, really clear about that. So I'm going to say it one more time. If you want CEUs or a certificate of attendance, you're required to attend the entire event and complete that certificate request form while this event is live. And again, the link is available at the end of the post-test. Also, a reminder that the goal of this research and training grant is to expand the numbers of well-trained MSW, MED school counseling, and PsyD professionals that are working with children, adolescents, and transitional-aged youth in high need and high demand areas. Okay, great. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to our SHARP trainers, Stacey Stroh and Claire Meringolo. Please see a more detailed description of these practitioners on our EPIC website. We are grateful to you and look forward to tonight's presentation.
All righty. So thank you first to Westchester University and the leadership team of EPIC for inviting Claire and myself to come share on the SHARP framework. We truly are honored that you invited us and extended this opportunity, and as well of all the participants that chose to take time out of your evening to kind of learn more about what we're doing here. So we'll kind of jump in and get started with introductions. A little bit about myself is my name is Stacey Stroh, and I am the lead SHARP trainer for the Collective of Anti-Racist Family Systems. Our organization was essentially established via SAMHSA grant, working to support child and family systems with adopting anti-racist and anti-oppressive practices. Our real hope is to prevent trauma exposure and repair the trauma effects in the lives of Black, African, and Latinx individuals and families. So in addition to my role there, I do also work as a clinician at Family Connections Baltimore, which is a neglect prevention. Oh, I see my notes are showing.
Stacey, I'll go ahead and jump in and start introducing myself if that works
Yes.
for you while we're getting our technology straight.
Yes, thank you.
Well, my name is Claire Meringolo, and I am so excited to be here with you guys tonight. I am so appreciative of being in community and space with you all tonight and learning together and being part on a journey together. So I am a clinical instructor at the University of Maryland School of Social Work with the Office of Title IV-E for Public Child Welfare Program at the University of Maryland. I am one of the lead motivational interviewing trainers for our child welfare students, as well as our SUDIF students. I am also one of the SHARP trainers for the collective as well. So I am thrilled to be with you guys and looking forward to the next 2 hours with you. So typically our trainings are a lot smaller, usually about a max of 20 participants, and that helps us to really build relationship and foster rich conversations. So we're not going to have that opportunity tonight, but we would love, if possible, for you to just chat out briefly your name, job role, and hometown. So I am going to just share that, obviously, I'm Claire Meringolo. I grew up in Silver Spring, right outside of the DC area. I have so much love for the DC area. And the other part of my role is that I am a mom of 3 children. I have 3 lovely coworkers who are downstairs. They are active and busy. My oldest is, he's 8 years old and told me that his amygdala was feeling a little crazy today. So that's where we are right now. So I'm going to turn it back over to Stacey. And again, looking forward to being with you guys.
All right, I think we got our text sorted out. Let me know in the chat. But yeah, so a little bit about me. So my hometown is Baltimore City. And there's so many things to love about it. We get a bad rap. We know you probably see us in the news a lot for crime and various other things, but the people are just truly wonderful. There's always kind of something exciting happening. My favorite thing is like driving and kind of seeing folks just being their authentic selves right on the bus stop or corner where they're rapping and singing. So we kind of love that about our city. And we're seeing lots of comments come through. So we got social workers here, psychotherapists, we got some folks in Lancaster, we have grad students, we have lots of different federal government workers. So it seems like we do have a lot of different domains kind of shown here in lots of different areas. Phoenixville, we have
an extra shout out for the students in the house tonight, because Stacey and I work closely with the students at University of Maryland. So we have extra love for you all tonight, because we know this has probably been a long few months for you.
Yes, wow, lovely. New Jersey, we got Brookhaven, PA, lots of Phillies. I've only been there one time, but it was a whole blast. So loving all these responses.
I hope we have some Eagles fans in around here tonight.
Don't say that. This is Ravens territory. Well, thank you all for chatting in a little bit about yourselves, about your job roles, where you are, situated now in the world, and kind of where you came from. Our hometowns are really important to us. So thank you for indulging us with that. So we will kind of keep moving. So we thought, to first start with a mindfulness activity and intention setting, that it can be really easy in training sessions for us to rush into content, right? But it's important for us to pause and to begin to practice being reflective, which is crucial for engaging and sustaining anti-racist work. And we're going to give you a few minutes to consider what brought you to this training tonight. What are you hoping for? And how will you manage discomfort and distraction, right? We acknowledge that it's 6:18 and we all have likely had really busy days, whether that's at school or in the professional realm or with family. So it can be kind of, our minds are in a million places. So we really wanted to kind of give us a moment to center. And we also wanted to encourage you to think about how you're going to take care of yourself throughout this session. It's 2 hours. It's not very long, but if you're thirsty, go get a drink. If you need to use the bathroom, please go, because self-care is an act of resistance. Rest is an act of resistance. And those are things that we have to practice, lean into, and model, especially in human service professional. field, because that's not often the case, right? We work with a lot of families who maybe don't feel that they can or should prioritize their needs. So we're going to give you just a few moments. We'll chat out the questions for you, just for you to think about. Again, those questions are: what brought you to this training tonight? What are you hoping for? And how will you manage discomfort and distraction? And put that right in the chat. And I'm going to give you just a few minutes. So I'll give you like to 6:21, and then we'll come back and keep continuing with our session. Okay, it looks like we're already getting some messages in the chat about things, intentions that you've set for yourself, wanting to learn new techniques, being interested in expanding your MI practice, just kind of interested in learning new things, and a lot of what brought you here, like, pre-Cs. Ain't nothing wrong with that. We all need that in our professional work. To hone your MI skills, looking to learn, more for wellness coaching, curious about SHARP. You'll definitely learn more about that tonight. Understanding macro applications of MI, wanting to learn more about yourself and your work with clients. So these are all beautiful reasons to be here, and they're all valid, right? And you might find that we hope that you return to this work, right, after we share it tonight, and maybe your reasons for utilizing the framework, expanding your practice, continuing on your journey might change over time. And so we welcome kind of continued engagement past tonight, and there'll be opportunities for that at the end, where we will extend that opportunity to be in different spaces with one another. So thank you all for chatting out your responses, taking a moment to just breathe and pause in the busyness that is the human services professional. So just start with the quote: in order to transform society, we first must be transformed. So, okay, so a little bit of a rundown of the night. We're going to be describing the SHARP framework and identifying the 5 components, defining socially engineered trauma, recognizing the importance of utilizing the SHARP framework during service provision with individuals, families, and children, and describing the core elements of motivational interviewing, which some of you from the MIT network might be familiar with, and then kind of summarizing a sharpened approach to motivational interviewing. And so we'll do that in a variety of ways. So in terms of our SHARP history and heart, a little bit about SHARP is our framework was published by Dr. Wendy Shaia in 2019. Although it was very much in the works from 2015 and on, and it continues to be so. It's a developing framework. We're finding over time more and more uses of it, and just getting better in our analysis and utilization of the practice. So Dr. Shaia herself is a researcher. She's a clinical assistant professor and the executive director of the Center for Restorative Change at University of Maryland School of Social Work. And Dr. Shaia has more than 30 years of experience developing, implementing, and leading organizations programs. So a little bit of context about why SHARP and how SHARP came to be. A story that she often likes to start her presentations with, that kind of encapsulates her experience in this work and the need to develop a new approach, is the parable of the river. And so I'm going to read this for you. We're actually going to chat out the link for you so that you can kind of read along with me, just so that you kind of have a better way to follow. So I'm going to start. So one day, a group of villagers was working in the fields by a river. Suddenly, someone noticed a baby floating downstream. A woman rushed out and rescued the baby, brought it to shore, and cared for it. During the next several days, more babies were found floating downstream, and the villagers rescued them as well. But before long, there was a steady stream of babies floating downstream. Soon the whole village was involved in the many tasks of rescue work, pulling these children out of the stream, ensuring they were properly fed, clothed, and housed, and integrating them into the life of the village. Well, not all the babies, now very numerous, but could be saved. The villagers felt that they were doing well to save as many as they could, right? Before long, however, the village became exhausted with all the rescue work. Some villagers suggested they go upstream. to discover how all their babies were getting into the river in the first place. Had a mysterious illness stricken these poor children? Had the shoreline been made unsafe by an earthquake? Was some hateful person throwing them in deliberately? Was an even more exhausted village upstream abandoning them out of hopelessness? A huge controversy erupted in the village. One group argued that every possible hand was needed to save the babies, since they were barely keeping up with the current flow. The other group argued that if they found out how the babies were getting into the water further upstream, they could repair the situation up there. They could save all the babies and eliminate the need for the costly rescue operation downstream. Don't you see, cried some? If we find out how they're getting in the river, we can stop the problem and no babies will drown. By going upstream, we can eliminate the cause of the problem. But it's too risky, said the village elders. It might fail. It's not for us to change the system. And besides, how we occupy ourselves if we no longer had to do this. I just want you to take a moment and let those words kind of wash over you and visualize the story. And so the parable of the river. This kind of reminds me of the quote, right? Insanity is doing the same thing again and expecting different results. Working in an urban context, in the human services field in general, there seems to be no short of drowning babies, right? Maybe it's not actual literal babies coming down a stream, but there are high concentrations of poverty and its associated consequences. We see violence, we see trauma, we see hopelessness in its various forms, right? And many social workers, myself, I'm guilty, right? And human service professionals of every kind, whether you're a nurse, a student, various job roles you might have, we spend a lot of time like the village, a lot of our energy and resources responding to the consequences of poverty and oppression versus addressing the underlying causes. And by doing this, we see the vicious cycle where both families and providers feel stuck and hopeless. So that's kind of what SHARP is attempting to address. It's a way of approaching this work with a complete understanding of the causes of the social issues, so there can be a comprehensive and effective approach to services. And so what does that look like for us? So a little bit about SHARP in a nutshell. We'll talk about what it is and what it isn't. SHARP framework is a lens through which human service providers may view their clients and presenting issues. It allows providers to sharpen their gaze on not just the client in front of them, but all of the surrounding contextual issues which accompany are the root of causes of and intensify human suffering. So it's a tool to address poverty, and it was specifically developed by Dr. Shaia's work, by her urban context, right? She was seeing, a lot of clients within the African-American population, which experiences the highest rate of poverty in the US due to systematic racism. But this approach can actually be used in a variety of settings with folks who may fall within a low socioeconomic group, who maybe are Indigenous peoples, who maybe are people with disabilities, and we've seen, how it can be utilized with folks in the LGBTQ2S+ community. So the framework is not just for frontline workers, but rather relies on the whole continuum of services, from micro to macro level practitioners. In the same way that human beings are whole and complex, so too should we begin to view society's problems as wide, complex, and requiring new and innovative approaches. So it's not meant to replace existing modalities such as motivational interviewing, but rather to enhance the current practices in which that we will get into later point of the presentation. So we'll show you a little bit of how you might integrate that with motivational interviewing specifically, but it can be used with a variety of things. At Family Connections, we use a lot of narrative therapy. We use CBT+. We use a variety of different techniques with a sharpened lens. And so it's not a prescriptive model. as humans, we love an A+B, right? We love when things are clear and kind of, especially as there's students here and early, practitioners in your career, we love clear answers. But SHARP is not meant to tell you what to do. It's meant to give you a different way of viewing your work, and then it's for you to grapple with. And that's something that we do at Family Connections and at the Center for Restorative Change. We're all kind of internalizing this work and figuring out what to do with it next. So what does transformation truly require? It requires a multifaceted approach, right? It has to first start on the personal level, right? Us examining ourselves and our biases, our values, our how we show up in the world, right? How we hold space for families. And then looking at the professional. We have to look at what is the history of our profession? What is our role and how is it currently impacting families, right? And how does our agency even operate? How do we see racism and structural oppression even show up in our workforce? And what kind of has been the outcomes for families and even for workers within our field? And then the political, we have to look at society on a macro level and our role, because a lot of times there's this dichotomy in our fields of you're either a frontline worker or you're a supervisor or you do policy, or in social work, there's, these schools of thought where it's like you're clinical or you're macro, but we believe that you need to be both. And that transformation is a multifaceted approach. And we joke that Family Connections is like a lab for SHARP. We've gone through a lot of work to fully integrate it into our service delivery model. So we've taken a look at our assessments. We've taken a look at, how we develop service plans and what concrete resources we provide for families and how we shift our research and reporting practices. Like, it's been a journey and we're not fully there yet. There's still a lot of work to do, a lot of learning to do. So we just hope that this is like a foundation for you to go on a further exploration, right? To sit with the hard questions, to be in uncomfortable spaces, but press forward, because change is really, really important. So it's a lot of work, but we have to commit to what that process looks like for ourselves and for others. So next up, just a little bit about kind of our SHARP roots. We developed the SHARP framework to support our clients in building internal power and from their experiences. And the framework and our work in general is rooted in a lot of different lenses and approaches. So just to briefly go over these might look really familiar to you, might could define them yourselves, but just so we all have a clear understanding, anti-racism and anti-oppression, what we mean by that is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies, and practices and attitudes, so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. An anti-racist approach to social work or the human services professional as a whole is about first acknowledging oppression and discussing a future where all families feel a sense of belonging and purpose. And empowerment theory. This is not about giving power, but unleashing human potential. People already have power. We don't give people power. We just unlock it. We just are a part of helping them to learn to utilize it. And the systems theory, the belief that people are products of complex systems rather than individuals who act in isolation. In trauma theory, we assume that individuals, especially individuals of color, are more likely than not to have a history of trauma, which impacts their mental health, behaviors, functionings, and outcomes. And that this trauma is systemic and intentional, which we'll get more into a little bit later on. So liberation theory, in a nutshell, is seeing racism as a problem in every space, even those held sacred, and rewriting the narrative of Black folks as evil, but rather deserving of love. And then grassroots community organizing. We believe that collective action by people who live in the community involves significant numbers of people and are built on participatory processes where the folks impacted get to have leadership and decision-making power. And mindfulness, as Rhonda McGee says, mindfulness deepens our ability to notice very subtle aspects of our lived experience and to be present with those aspects. She says it also provides an ethical lens to help us understand how the ways we engage impact our interpersonal relationships and actions in the world. So that's a little bit about what we kind of believe, that's our core values, and that's what has influenced kind of where we are today. So we'll kind of jump into, as we discuss, kind of finding what we mean by socially engineered trauma, which is a term that was developed by Dr. Shaia. Socially engineered trauma for us, we define as the traumatic events rooted in social forces of oppression and inequality. Socially engineered trauma should be differentiated from randomly occurring trauma because our team believes that it's not random. As feminist trauma theory, Bonnie Burstow writes, specific traumatic events happen to specific people in specific locations and with specific contexts, inevitably involve other human beings. As such, trauma is inherently political. And so what we mean by that is we see this happening, right, for our families of color. And there's a long kind of history and trajectory and all these social forces that kind of impact these things. The very American contemporary culture and structure creates these narratives, creates these traumas, and really creates a group of vulnerable individuals. So these can be described as like macro level forces which predispose certain social groups to traumatic events on the micro level of a human experience. And in this way, vulnerability and susceptibility amongst populations is not intrinsic, right? It's not just, oh, that neighborhood just so happens that this is more common, right? You know, it is not intrinsic, it is externally exposed, right? So it's important for us to understand and address structural oppression because trauma minus context equals shame and blame. And maybe you have a story of a family that you've worked with where they come in feeling incredibly hopeless. They come in feeling, you know, that they are entirely to blame, but then you can kind of see where they are, you know, working their hardest or where things haven't quite lined up for them. And why is that the case, right? We have to kind of question what we're seeing in front of us, especially when we're seeing it in large numbers. So socially engineered traumas include various kinds, but we kind of categorize them in three major ways. White supremacist racism, so macro level systems creating dynamics where Black people are more likely to be incarcerated, unhoused, poor, underemployed, involved in child welfare, and experience multiple traumatic events. Neoliberal economic policies, the idea that people are responsible for their own economic well-being, the bootstraps mentality, right? We can all do it. We all have the same advantages in life, which is not quite true. When income is distributed at these social classes. And then cisgender heteropatriarchy, the inequitable status of women and gender minorities under men creates more women living in poverty and disparities in mental health issues. So at a fundamental level, SHARP believes that socially engineered trauma is a key piece of this framework and it's necessary to understand in human services work. And there are lenses that we can infuse into existing practices. So we just don't have these conversations, we adjust our practice internally. So I think you guys can probably hear my coworker. My dog is in need of some attention. So I know many of us have pets and kids. And so in all of our trainings, we usually welcome them in, right? Because we're in this post-pandemic society. You know, things are still raging. We're at home a lot. So thank you for your graciousness. But again, we don't want to just have these conversations internally. Like, I think a lot of times we do talk about racism as a, you know, within our agencies or within our different domains or in our classrooms, but how are we having these conversations with families, right? That's really important for us to invite them into the conversations and into solution building, right? So as we're adjusting our practice. So I'm going to jump now into the SHARP framework. So this is a little fun graphic to kind of show in a very simplistic way what exactly is the SHARP framework. So the 5 different components are structural oppression, which is simply asking which structural inequities affect the person. So the examples listed on here are poor housing, inequitable education experiences, discriminatory policies. And so for us at Family Connections, our biggest need, the reason that we get a lot of referrals and a lot of our services are oriented around housing, specifically in Baltimore City. So for us, It's inadequate housing and affordable housing. Think about the pandemic, right? And how the market boomed, right? With housing sales and rental prices, and how that disproportionately affects folks of color, right? And why they can't afford that, due to poor education, employer bias and discrimination, and just lack of social networks and support, right? Historical context. We're looking at what historical issues are relevant. So some examples here are racial segregation, intergenerational poverty, and war. So back to the housing example for us in Baltimore City, redlining has been a huge part of our history. And maybe in Philadelphia, you see similar things. Maybe in the various spaces that you work in, you can kind of point out neighborhoods that have been, concentrated with poverty. And then look at the folks that live there, right? And then look at neighborhoods of extreme wealth and resource and opportunities. Oh, and I see a question about the slides. We will be providing them at the end. But yes, so we, have this history, and redlining is a discriminatory practice in the housing sector, that consists of lots of things like denial of mortgages, insurance, loans, and financial services to residents, right? And how, when we track that through history, that's disproportionately affected people of color. So it's a disadvantaged Black communities and advantaged white communities. So in Baltimore, we actually, if you kind of look at a map of Baltimore, they call it the Black butterfly and the white L, right? So you see the L kind of right in the middle, it's the Inner Harbor area. It's full of businesses, it's full of thriving communities and all these things, and kind of all around it are all these communities that have been ravaged by the history of racism. So, and then analysis of role. We really have to ask ourselves, will we be, as the service provider, whatever our role is, maintain or disrupt the oppression, right? And there's no neutral role, which we'll get into more. And then reciprocity, mutuality, how will both the person and service clinician bring mutuality and reciprocity into the service relationship? So our different expertise. Although we have families that are coming to us for supportive services, we often are able to gain just as much from them, learning about what makes them successful caregivers, learning about their activism in their community, being a part of their families, getting to experience the fullness of everything that they embody. And then when we get to kind of allow space for that, then we welcome in their power, right? We unleash their power by asking, well, what can the person do alone or with others to be active in creating change for the future, right? So we're going to dig into all these a little further. So structural racism and structural oppression, what do we mean by that? Well, clicking. Here we go. So we kind of define it as the forms of racism that are pervasively and deeply embedded in systems, laws, written or unwritten policies, and entrenched practices and beliefs that produce, condone, perpetuate widespread unfair treatment and oppression of people of color with adverse health consequences. So there's 4 levels of racism, which I will quickly click through here and just kind of define for you. So there's individual racism, which is our internalized. It's our private beliefs, values, and feelings. And then it's kind of interpersonal too, and how those show up in our actions, behaviors, and language with others. So maybe that's thinking Black people are lazy. That's an example of that, right? So institutional racism. So rules, policies, procedures within the systems created by white folks in power. So that's kind of some of the things like, how were they able to get away with denying folks of color these loans, right? Because they had institutional power. Cultural racism. So aspects of culture, beauty, and truth related to whiteness, right? Even in a professional space, like who denotes, who is professional and not professional, and kind of like the whole movement around Black hair even, right? And how that was, very much discriminated against. And then structural racism, that includes all levels and how they work together to create a system of oppression. So it's all of those things, that racism is multifaceted and it's deeply, pervasive in society. So for the SHARP framework, we're asking providers, to consider the structural oppression, consider, what's happening on the socio and political level. What are the structural barriers, like even things like transportation, right, with accessing services? And so we're asking folks to identify the issues in that person's environment that impacts their ability to be successful and name it with them. Reflecting on policies and structural issues specifically contributing to that person's situation, outlining how multiple overlapping structural issues contribute to their issues, and exploring how the person has internalized or externalized the oppression they have experienced. So again, that like shame and blame. So being able to like bring that up and address that. And being intentional on providing services and interventions that do not blame the person or the community for being a victim. So that's kind of what we mean by structural oppression. And so moving on to the historical context. My slides are not shifting. Give us one moment in this lovely world of Zoom. Oh, there we go. So historical context. We define this as the political, social, cultural, and economic setting for a particular idea or event. We love this quote by Martin Luther King saying, we're not the makers of history, we are made by history, right? So each and every one of us have a personal history and a collective history that we're a part of. And that's really important in service delivery, of really truly understanding what may be showing up for our clients. So in the SHARP framework, we're asking our providers to address historical context by identifying what those historical issues in the person's environment may be and how they're relevant to what they're experiencing now, and then linking that history to the impacted individual, community, then and now, and assessing how the historical context impacts the person's response to their environment, their provider, and self. Think like coping, think trust, relationships, pride, conflict management, self-esteem, and then challenging what we consider normal responses and functioning, giving past and recurrent trauma, and then acknowledging the impact of racism on services and interventions. And then again, we go to analysis of the role. So we have to explore what our role in the service relationship is and ask, will we maintain or disrupt the status quo? There's no neutral position, as our silence and inaction has consequences. Just because you don't believe that you're actively a part of the problem doesn't mean that you aren't. And if you haven't explored that, if you haven't unpacked that, then how can you even fully know that? So SHARP is asking providers to analyze their role by considering how similar and how different you are to the individuals and communities that you serve. Learning to identify and name those differences around race, gender, socioeconomic status, sexual identity. There's so many different aspects that we are bringing into this work and that do impact how we see our clients and how we show up in this work. So we have to explore that personal identity and that personal history and how that's coloring how we view the issues that they're facing and even our understanding. We have to be aware of what biases are activated while providing those services, and examine how our personal privileges, biases, and values impact our decision-making to either maintain or disrupt. And you have to, in the way we kind of view maintaining versus disrupting is that there is limitations, right? To our energy, to our time, to our passions, right? Not everybody can do everything all at once. But there needs to be an intentional piece of understanding when you are maintaining, when you are disrupting, and why. Because even disrupting sounds like, yeah, that's what we should be doing always. But sometimes if we jump in too quickly without that analysis, right, without that relationship, then we can actually be harmful to the families that we're working with, right? Speaking on their behalf, showing up and taking leadership in positions that we don't, that the community hasn't asked for, right? Providing services that they haven't asked for, or even putting them in harm in some ways. So we have to be very, very intentional with whatever role that we're wearing and knowing why, because maybe you're maintaining for self-preservation. Maybe you are a worker of color. Maybe you are trying to maintain your family or this, that, and the other. We kind of view it as like a wave, right? There's like outrage and then there's complacency, outrage and complacency. You can't sustain either one. You can't stay stuck in a place of complacency And you can't also sustain rage at all times. So there is a bit of that internal work, going back to like the different levels of transformation. We have to personally be checking in with ourselves and personally be wrestling with why, the whys behind everything that we're doing. Because oftentimes in the human services professionals, we just get into the routine of things, right? We've seen this before, so we know why, or we're just going to provide the same intervention to this, because of X, Y, and Z. But do we ever challenge these evidence-based practices? Do we ever challenge our approach and rethink and reimagine how we do services? And so that's part of us understanding our role and where we are. And so reciprocity, mutuality. We love this quote that true community is based upon equality, mutuality, and reciprocity. It affirms the richness of individual diversity, as well as the common human ties that bind us together. And the SHARP framework, the provider is encouraged to view the person they're working with as more than the sum of their problems. And as someone who has talents, gifts, strengths, experiences, that they can share with the social worker as well as others in their community. And it's a mindset where the client is not just a recipient of the provider's knowledge and service, but they also have something valuable to offer. So even think about maybe your service sector and what you call your clients, right? Do you call them customers? Do you call them clients? Do you call them caregivers? Do you call them families? Like, what do you call them and why? Have you ever thought about the connotation that brings for the communities that you serve? So in human services, there's a big emphasis on the strengths-based approach, right? We hear that a lot, but oftentimes this can be very surface level, and we have to question, is it coming from a place of authenticity? And how are these strengths actually being incorporated into the services we provide? Do we allow opportunity for folks to truly engage back with us, to share in those things? And so SHARP is asking us as providers to present the person as having much knowledge and experience as the provider, but just maybe in different areas of expertise. I think about myself and a client I'm currently serving with. She was an educator for many, many years until she had, a health scare and concern, which now she's not able to work, and that impacts her finances, right? So, I have to approach her not just as someone who needs the support, but someone who has a wealth of experience, right? Who has this history, who has all of these things that she brings to the table as well. And then how can we still utilize them within our service relationship and beyond? And so we're presenting ourselves as real people in our relationships. We're not robots, right? And we have to have some level of disclosure and vulnerability and accepting gifts from the person. It's not always, physical, monetary. There's lots of rules and regulations depending on your various job roles, but there are ways that we can accept gifts, and it's bi-directional, suggests that they can reciprocate things like affection, refreshments. What does it hurt for us to take water or homemade empanadas? And their kindness and their words of support and how they want to even show up for us when they're asking about things like your pregnancy, when they're asking about things like your family, how do we humanize the service delivery process and present them, as being valuable to our structures, to our society, to everything, and exploring those opportunities with them for them to share their strengths to the wider community. So our messaging is really, really important to families. Either we're building them up or we're further oppressing their communities. And so power, the final aspect, a quote from Martin Luther King defines power as the ability to achieve a purpose. It's the strength required to bring able social, political, and economic change. So there's various types of power. A sharpened approach is rooted in the understanding that power is ever-changing and multidimensional. It's neither good nor bad. It's really, how it's used and what the impact is. And that individuals may benefit from power of which they are unaware, right? So that's, not about your personal thoughts and values about racism. It's about, what are the implications? What's the history? What's the policies? And how do we acknowledge where our privileges are? And there are different types of power. There's power over, power within, power to, and power for. So a little bit of a kind of explanation of what we mean by those things. Personal power, we're talking about self-determination and the power that an individual possesses or builds in their personal life and interpersonal relationships. And social power, so that's communal self-determination, grassroots collective of organizational personal power, and power that social groups possess or build amongst themselves to determine and shape their collective lives. And then we're talking about institutional power, which is that power to create and shape the rules, policies, and actions within an institution, and to have to be a decision maker, right? And to have great influence upon an institution or community. And then structural power, which is that creates and shapes the rules, policies, and actions that govern multiple and intersecting institutions and industries. So oftentimes we can feel really powerless, right? As providers, but we have to, again, go back and analyze our role. We have to look and recognize what our power is, recognize the power of the client, and combine the two, that we are mutually dependent on each other as a society. And we also have to leverage and exercise, and no great social movement happened without a struggle, happened without, a lot of work. And so we have to be willing to pay the cost of power as well. And so SHARP is asking what the provider can do alone and with others to change and impact. We're asking that you present that person as an active being, not a passive recipient of circumstances, and that they can be an active change agent for the future, and exploring with the person their readiness first to engage in individual or collective action, right? Doing a thorough assessment of where they are and what their strengths are and how they might be utilized, and discussing specific strategies, right? Such as voter education, voting, community organizing, letter writing, testifying before lawmakers, getting involved with their community organizations like parent groups. Like, there's various ways that the provider or the client or individual or community might want to leverage their power, but we're not giving that to them. We're helping unpack that with them, and reminding the person that they have strengths and assets that can be useful to a changing society. So, we ran through that fairly quickly. We have a lot to cover tonight. But next up, we're just kind of gonna work through a sharpened analysis on the healthcare system. We were kind of told a lot of you folks intersect at various parts. We were told that some people, have more of a child welfare background and they're working with children. We see people, we have all different things chatted out to us and where you might be, but there's various systems in America, right? Child welfare, healthcare, there's the political system, the education system, religion, environment, criminal justice system, government benefits, housing, food, nutrition, transportation, economic, employment, media, and news. All of these systems, unfortunately, what they have in common is the disproportionality of how they oppress folks of color, right? And then when you layer them and compound them, that intersectionality, right, where you see race and class and gender, in one individual or a group, and how it just creates, additional discrimination and disadvantage. And so we want you to think about yourself. Think about your job role, where you currently are placed, whether that's a student and you're interning at a local agency, whether that's, you are an administrator or a supervisor. Think about your current job role. Think about the agency and the populations that you serve. And we want you to specifically think about how you are intersecting with the healthcare system. And so we're going to kind of open up the chat a little bit for you to be able to kind of engage with us. We're going to lead you through the various components of the SHARP framework, which we quickly ran over, and allow you to kind of point out, answer some questions and engage with us. And then we'll kind of share, what came to mind when we were thinking about the healthcare field. So we're going to start with structural oppression and historical context. So the first question that we have for you that we want you to first reflect on, and then maybe chat out some responses, are based on, again, your job within your agency, within your community that you serve. What are the system barriers that families encounter based on the role? So how are, how is the healthcare system and how it's structured creating challenges for the families that you serve? So we'll give you about 2 minutes to start chatting things out, and then we'll come back and engage in discussion. Okay. Thank you to everybody that's already started chatting.
The chat is flying. Thank you, guys. So we see there's a lot of common threads coming through the chat here, a lot of issues related to accessibility, long wait lists for specialized care, long wait lists for care generally, long wait lists for gender affirming services. We see a lot of issues where there's not enough bilingual staff, a lack of staff who speak their native language, lack of good treatment options, co-payment challenges, a lot of common threads, no beds available in residential treatment, and stigma around mental illness. So we have a lot coming through here. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all. Yeah, we kind of had the same thoughts when we were thinking about the healthcare system, right? Inadequate access to preventative care, nutrition, and safe housing, and how that might impact health issues being treated in the system. So like even why people are intersecting with the healthcare system in general could already be kind of steeped in some of that structural oppression. Insurance, right? And how that's based and tied to employment and income. And so access to providers is restricted. And even just thinking about our history, Claire and I, our background in child welfare, and how the disproportionate amount of, Black mothers who are referred when they give birth, right, when they're in the hospital setting, and then just the compounding impact that has, right? And so I see some folks already started kind of chatting out about H. We'll give you a few moments to reflect in the same way on the historical context. So are there ways that your relationship is already impacted based on the history of the profession of healthcare, of your profession and of healthcare? So if think about your history of your job role and how that intersects. And so we'll give you a moment to kind of chat out some of those things. We're already seeing great responses coming through. We're seeing some really great responses coming in. So I'll let Claire kind of
a lot of
some of those.
Yeah, a lot of common threads related to distrust in the various systems. Distrust, I see there is someone who named the child welfare system specifically, that absolutely comes up for both Stacey and I, where the initial thought that families have when working with a child welfare system is distrust, and I'm going to have my child taken away. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Lots of previous experience, Eurocentric approaches to lots of issues with diagnosis, Eurocentric approaches. Yes, lack of cultural awareness. So some things that we were thinking of here, just to contribute to I really appreciate, with deep appreciation for everything that people have shared, is using science to dehumanize folks of color, thinking about experiments such as the Tuskegee study. And I see someone just named that in the chat as well. This was a study where 600 Black men in Alabama were recruited for a syphilis study. 399 were never treated and were observed until they died, nor were their families informed about. And this study went on from 1932 to 1972. So with this, we want to think it's so important for us to think about the history of the way your agency as a whole interacts. So much appreciation for everything that people have shared so far. Okay. So moving on, so we are going to talk for a minute about what we would like for you to do is think about your client, patient population, those whom you are partnering with. How alike or different are you from the individuals that you partner and work with? And how does this impact your service delivery? So we'll take a few minutes just to reflect on this. Feel free to send your responses through the chat. Right,
One
Stacey?
thing I'm noticing, I do see a lot of folks kind of talking about the similarities between themselves and their clients. And I do want to encourage all of us to truly explore the individual and kind of what they present as, because everybody's unique and everyone has a unique story. And sometimes when we do align with the clients that we serve, we can kind of, our values, our biases can kind of show up in that work as well, where we are making assumptions about their culture, making assumptions about their values, their beliefs, and what is in their best interest. So that is also something that we have to be wary of as well.
Stacey, did you want to go through the chat, or did you want me to go through?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, there's various things that we're seeing here. Just a lot of them, similar age, religion, gender identity, racial, ethnic backgrounds. And then some people pointing out the differences and how that does show up in their work, right? And how it impacts the service delivery. Back to those things that we're talking about, like that distrust that people already have before you even walk in the door, before they get to know you, right? Just because of how you're presenting. And just the barriers that is, and how we have to kind of acknowledge that, right? And not kind of glance over that and graze over that. So definitely, I love that people are acknowledging their financial privileges and, compared to their clients, and being aware of, their race and just where different people fall on the spectrum of identity. So these are all great responses. Thank you all for being transparent, right, about your own role and how that may positively or negatively impact clients.
All right, so the final part in our SHARPened analysis is looking at reciprocity and mutuality and power. So take a moment and really think about your relationship with your client or patient. And do you view this relationship as bidirectional? And does your approach acknowledge that this individual brings strengths and gifts? So take a minute, because and you can even think of a family that you are working with directly, or one client in particular, but take a minute to think about whether this relationship is bidirectional, and whether their approach really brings in and incorporates their strengths and gifts.
I can see some of you are already chatting out things about, right, where you kind of clash between your values maybe and the organizational procedures and policies, right, about not accepting gifts. I remember in my orientation at a local Department of Social Services, them telling me that I couldn't even accept things like a hand-drawn picture from a client, right, and kind of insinuating and suggesting that power imbalance and differentials and different things like that, where is that with those sorts of things, we do have to challenge and question, like, who created these policies and who do they benefit? What does it maintain? And so there are certain things that we can understand there should be protections, there should be safety when we're considering power dynamics, and be very transparent about those things. But also, how do we acknowledge that these families are humans and they deserve to be a part of the service relationship? And so, yes, a lot of people are sharing how they kind of already using this in their practice, right? Asking questions, pointing out the strengths, right? That the families are the experts with their children and on themselves. And that this sometimes can be a struggle, right? Pulling out those strengths to not be judgmental. Thank you for transparency of folks saying that this is sometimes hard, right? Sometimes, but we don't also want to be digging so deep that we're like pulling out things that are not authentic and that are genuine, because families can sense that, and that really has a negative impact on your relationships with them. And it has to be that bidirectional. But yeah, art therapy, there's just different ways that you guys are suggesting with one another. So we love everyone's really thoughtful responses.
So thank you for your and definitely thank you for your transparency for those who feel like that maybe is not incorporated into their practice. So in our last piece of our SHARPened analysis, what areas within your profession can you include client and patient voices? And even if it's not happening now, how might you be able to do it? Use this space to dream and think.
I love the response about like bringing the clients onto the board, right? I see that about like working with homeless folks, and that's so important to have voice, and not just performative voice. Lots of people love to tout that they have community members, but do they get a true vote, a final say If they say that they don't like an approach or a plan, are we willing to scrap it? Are we willing to change approaches? At Family Connections, we've gone through a lot of like work around logo changes and what do we want to call ourselves and this, that, and the other. And we really truly take their feedback, and we actually have what we call the Caregiver Advisory Group. And within our collective anti-racist system, which is the various agencies working kind of on this anti-racist, anti-oppressive, framework, there is a advisory board that actually has power, right? We are giving them our materials. We are eliciting their lived stories, right? And really truly giving them power in our organization. So that has to be important. But yes, including them in meetings and, doing the surveys and focus groups and, and just inviting them in at every point. Yes, we love
seeing the youth voices, bringing our youth in specifically, and giving choice, taking the feedback. I think just as Stacey said, are we comfortable with making the change? Is our organization going to be open to those changes? Or are we just doing it to say that we did it? Using pronouns in my email signature. Goal creating.
Yeah, there can be simple, small ways, and then there can be major ways. So love even that line about the email.
Yeah.
So we're going to transition and let Claire take it away, talking about some motivational interviewing.
All right. Stacey, do you mind if you continue to move the slides along just so we don't have any technology? Okay. All right. So we are going to talk about motivational interviewing and looking at motivational interviewing from that sharpened approach. So we have spent a lot of time tonight really taking time to discuss SHARP first, because we believe that this lays the foundation for ourselves and our organization before jumping into motivational interviewing, otherwise known as MI, or any other evidence-based practice or framework, because the work truly needs to happen within ourselves and exploration of the system that we are a part of. So we have talked about how transformation as providers needs to occur, so we can actually be part of the change within these systems. So we are here to talk about motivational interviewing, which is a person-centered approach that is a person-centered approach that is directed by the individual. It allows space for exploring ambivalence, and it is an approach that's used across many human service fields and across many interdisciplinaries, including the healthcare system. We do a lot of training and support with the substance use treatment program within the School of Social Work. So we believe that SHARP connects with motivational interviewing because it is so important and a common thread within both to consider the whole person. And it is looking at the whole person from a sharpened approach within the context of a larger system. The individual, who is the provider, can assist in naming the structure and historical pieces that are in place to remove the shame and the blame that an individual feels. Both approaches look at this work through the lens of authentic partnership. Just as we had talked about before, are we naming strengths and gifts? Are we naming them because this feels like a practice where we have to within an assessment? Or is it because there is something that we within connection feel? Do we view this relationship as bidirectional? Within motivational interviewing, we are going to look at power. There is a piece of PACE, which we'll talk about next, which is about empowerment. So it's really critical that we do our own work before we kind of jump into these frameworks from within the sharpened approach. So we're going to move on to looking at the spirit of motivational interviewing. So the spirit of motivational interviewing, the core of motivational interviewing is that it allows the individual to be the expert in their own lives and come up with their own solution with their own resources to do so. I saw that named in the chat many times earlier. So just the fact that we're already talking about the allowing the client or the individual that we are serving to be the expert. So the spirit of MI is called the PACE. So partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation/empowerment, as this will be changing. So when we look at this from a sharpened approach, we are looking at partnership. And we are connecting that to the analysis of our role. How similar and different are we? What life experiences do we share? And one of those things that we can ask ourselves is, am I engaged in this relationship because I want to help? Or can I acknowledge that this person has been impacted by structural oppression? And can I name that while engaging in this relationship to form a true, authentic partnership? When we are looking at the next piece, which is acceptance, so we are doing the work to understand the systems of power and understand the systems that our families and individuals that we are serving are intersecting with. We are going to be able to invite a person into these conversations around larger systemic issues. When we look at compassion, which is the next piece of PACE, we are removing shame and blame. We are sending the message. We are going to be part of the message that we as the provider are not blaming. We're not blaming. We are not shaming. We are understanding that that a family has been part of a system, and we're using that to enhance rapport. This allows the provider to have a more holistic view of a person. And when we look at the final piece of the PACE, we are about seeing, and when I say seeing, we are seeing a whole person who has gifts and strengths. How can the provider support this person? How can we as the individuals see that, help support and bring that out? And how can we help the individual to build their own power from within? So those are some of the roles that we will be playing from a sharpened approach. So Stacey, thank you. So with that, there are 4 stages to motivational interviewing, and this is not a linear process. So with looking at the process of the stages of MI, the first is engagement, and that is getting to know somebody on a humanistic level and establishing connection, developing a comfort and connection and collaboration with each other. This is a place where we would spend the most time in the work that we are doing to really ensure that this authentic partnership is created before we move forward, where we begin focusing and even talking about change. It is getting to know, and it's getting to know the whole, the piece. This is taking time, being patient with this process. So the next phase that we're going to be looking at is the early stages of identifying an area that we might be partnering with a family on. And this is an area we're going to work on together to maintain a direction towards change. So this is a place where we're going to listen for some things that maybe our individuals that we are working with say they want to change, reasons for changing, maybe some reasons that they don't want to change. There are ways that we can do this, such as asking for permission. And that is an incredibly important piece, that we don't just dive in and offer resources or offer suggestions to families. We are doing this to make sure that we ask whether this is okay, whether this is something that the family is ready for, and allowing the autonomy for a family to say, no, I'm not ready to receive that. The next phase is where the provider will help the individual voice and articulate reasons for change. And this might be through exploring values and beliefs. This might be a piece where we really take time to get to know what is important from that, what is important to that person, and what is important to the individual that we are partnering with. And the last piece is planning. And this is where we really emphasize autonomy, and the individual that we are serving is the creator of the plan. So they are the person that they have voice, they have choice, and we work together to figure out what is going to be in the family's best interest. So one of the pieces that is really important and critical to think about is we often in child welfare, in the work that we do, we will say we feel stuck. We are not sure where to go with the family. It's a family that we have seen and worked with time and time again. And when we revisit that from a sharpened lens, I will kind of share a story that a student who I am absolutely honored to work with, and I walked through in supervision using the SHARPened framework. So my student is partnered with, she's working under me as a field instructor and partnered with a social worker in a local department of social services. They have been out to this family's house numerous times. The family has had such significant experience with the child welfare system. The caregiver of the children that we are working with, who are teenagers, who've experienced just so many diagnoses, so much medication, and the caregiver was just appearing exhausted and withdrawn when coming in. And we were saying, so my student is saying, I don't know, I'm not sure what to do. And I know that I want to connect better with this individual. And we walked through some of the historical pieces together. So we walked through, what does the child welfare system mean to this family? And we talked about how there could be a feeling that we are here to remove this child. We are working these children. And so the student and I kind of talked through this. We talked through the roles that herself and the worker played. The worker who is assigned to work with this family is a young white woman. And my student is she's a Black woman who is a mother. She is raising teenagers herself. And she had the opportunity after our supervision to go out and work with this mom. And so they sat down together and she said, Claire, I think what I'm going to do is just try and connect with her on this, and really like connect with her on this human level. I'm going to go way back to the kind of engagement phases. And I'd like to share that I am also a mom and I know how hard it is to raise teenagers. And she did that. And shared that she works with teenagers. She also, that she herself is raising teenagers, acknowledged the challenges of that, and was able to name and walk through and talk through why mom was feeling so hesitant about the department. So mom had shared during this interaction that she was worried that we were there to judge and immediately remove these children who she has adopted, that she adopted family members and she adopted them out of state. She moved to this state she moved to Maryland. She didn't have very many resources. And so her immediate fear is that the department was going to take the kids. She also was afraid to engage in services and mental health treatment. As she named, all she can find in the county that we are working with is young white women. She had repeatedly received diagnosis, and so many diagnoses of ADHD and ODD, you name it, it was coming onto this paper, and she just was feeling so overwhelmed and exhausted by these systems. So my student and her were able to together name the fears about the department and pause and reflect on what the goal of in-home services was. We were able to she was able to sit with this mom and talk through that our goal is to keep her children with her. We were not looking to remove her children from the home, and also really honoring the fact that, and honoring and leaving space for conversation around race. So she said, so that she had talked about the importance of finding a therapist, a Black therapist. And so my student also said, I wanted to see if that's okay if we explored that together. And I took that piece on and asked for permission to partner and see what that would look like. We also in supervision process the difference of my student being able to go out and partner with this family, with this mom and her children, without the presence of the social worker. She's going to come, the social worker is going to come back, but we were planning to have a conversation about maybe different approaches we were going to take. So after this meeting, we were really able to partner differently with this mom because we were able to lay out some of these pieces within the SHARP framework. We were able to name some of the pieces of structural oppression. We were able to name the history of the department, take a step back and analyze our role, and really look at the pieces of what is this mom, what is this caregiver, and what is her children giving to the community. Mom was a military member, and this was also really a really challenging part of her identity, was asking for help alone. So they were able to sit together and name that, and then really look at power and how the department holds power, but also being able to build power because she had such a beautiful understanding of what her children's needs were. So I share that with you because we will use that example as we kind of talk through the next two slides because of different strategies that she used that I was able to kind of talk through with her, and we were able to role play within supervision. So Stacey, if you don't mind moving, thank you. So so the OARS is a piece to it's a piece to motivational interviewing. It is a skills-based model of interactive techniques that are adapted from a client-centered approach. The OARS stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. So the first piece, which is an open-ended question, and it allows someone to give a free-form answer without a yes or no. These are questions that are used for exploring. So what I'd like to see in the chat, if someone could put some if you would be comfortable to put some examples of some open-ended questions that you may use with a family that you are serving. How does that impact you? How are you feeling today? What does success look like for you? How has this experience affected you? Tell me more about your experience. Beautiful. So with my student and the family that she was working with, she asked questions. What were your experiences in the past with therapy like? What would be important when finding the right therapist for you? What would be important? What is important for us to consider when we are working with a psychiatrist and psychologist? Thank you. They're rolling in the chat. Thank you, guys. So in terms of the next phase, affirmations. So these affirmations are statements and gestures that recognize an individual's strengths and acknowledge behaviors that lead in the direction of positive change. No matter how large or how small, affirmations can build confidence, but we say that similarly as we mentioned earlier, they need to be genuine and authentic. So if you can pop a few of affirmations in the chat that you may have used recently, ways that you maybe can acknowledge one's own power as well. I'm proud of you for. Your willingness to persist during trying times is remarkable. That must have taken a lot of strength. So one of the things that we talked through and affirmed throughout our process was saying things like, you advocated so strongly for what type of provider that would be best for your child in that meeting. You are such a strong part of the community where you live. So many people have come to her for advice. So really building up and allowing her to see herself beyond just what the problems or the situation that brought her to DSS. The next piece, reflections. That involves listening and making statements. Reflections are defined as statements of understanding or ways to take things deeper and connect feelings or emotions. So an example of that would be, it is really important that you feel heard by your provider. You would like a provider that shares your background and ethnicity to share in your experience. The child welfare system has harmful history to families. If you can throw one reflection or two in the chat, that would be wonderful. Autonomy is important to you. That's right. That's right. I can hear how troubling this is for you. Yep. I can understand how difficult your past experience might have made you wary of sharing all of your experiences again. You've been misunderstood before. Yes. So a summary is bringing together several of the individual items that have been previously expressed in terms of thoughts, feelings, and concerns to help the conversation move forward. Sometimes we might feel like it is risky to name some of these things. It might feel risky to name some of these systems. But what is really important is to remember that we need to think of that as our part of our preparedness as providers, and whether that maybe for us was part of our dialogue. Does it feel risky to name these things because that wasn't part of a dialogue that maybe we grew up with? So this is just a really brief overview of pieces of the ORs within motivational interviewing, but just to kind of get us started in thinking more deeply. And then the last piece, which is really talking about socioeducation. We mentioned earlier about socially engineered trauma, and the term socioeducation is a method for discussing macro systems with clients to support trauma recovery. Socioeducation looks at macro factors of trauma influences instead of just signs and symptoms. Socioeducation should strive for reduce shame and self-blame, increase knowledge of how the problem impacts functioning, and enhances awareness of available options. Socioeducation is built to help clients explore whether their experiences of trauma can be understood and connected or arising from systems such as racism or patriarchy. There are ways that we can introduce this conversation, and that is one of the tools within motivational interviewing. And that is called the concept of elicit, provide, elicit, otherwise known as EPE. And that part of motivational interviewing is to understand the knowledge that somebody has first, and then before we share that, understand their thoughts regarding the information that we share. So we want to see what the individual knows first before we ask for permission to share. And then we follow up with learning more about their thoughts and seeing whether this is a resource they might be interested in. So going back to the family that my student and I were working with, there is a program in Anne Arundel County, or in Maryland, called the Healing Youth Alliance. So we were talking about mental health needs for the youth that the mom was working with. And one of the things that is a new initiative is the Healing Youth Alliance. It is a cohort of teens, youth in the area who actually educate and provide trauma responsive education to community members. This group becomes connected, and they are able to connect with one another through their past experiences, and then educate community members as well. So we talked to our individuals about this. We talked to the family about this and said, have you heard of the Healing Youth Alliance? And they said, yeah, actually, they came to my school to talk the other day, but I don't really know much about it. And so my student said, would it be okay if I shared some information about their program? This is a place where youth can advocate and provide education to the community around mental health and trauma. They thought that it would be real, the kids that we were serving thought that it would be really powerful, and thought it would be really powerful to be part of the solution and part of the education. So from that, she asked, what are your thoughts about learning more about that together? And where we landed is that my student got the family connected with the Healing Youth Alliance, and they are currently engaged. They're engaged with services, connecting with them, and are going to be part of educating their school community about mental health, about sex trafficking, and they are going to make sure their voices are heard in the process. So we know that this is a really brief introduction to SHARP and motivational interviewing, and typically this training takes days and days and days, and we've condensed it down into 2 hours. So we want to make sure that we're being respectful of time, and wanted to offer the opportunity for more resources to provide you guys, and have some time for question and answers. So I'm going to turn it back to Stacey.
Thank you, Claire. That was such a great example. And I think that really helped kind of synthesize a lot of what we've been talking about tonight. I'm going to quickly skip past the question piece. We'll come back to it. And I just want to share a little bit about kind of our ongoing work as a SHARP team. We have what we call the community of practice. And so I'm going to actually click to this slide and share a little bit about our multifaceted approach. So we have monthly virtual meetings. So we meet on the last Tuesday of the month from 1 to 2:30 p.m. That's the current time frame. That may shift in the future, but these are 90-minute meetings that are open to all who have taken a training of any sort. So that might be the overview, or that might be our 12-module series where we deconstruct human services and reconstruct it with the SHARPened approach. So wherever you fall in the continuum, you're welcome to join that piece of our community. We just had our actual meeting yesterday, and it was really fruitful, and we really dug into the historical context and our personal roles, and like we're able to talk about clients and families and systems that we're currently working with and get that support, because a lot of times, yes, this workshop counts. A lot of times when we learn something new, it can be really isolating when we're in an agency that maybe isn't aligned with anti-racist and anti-oppressive principles, or if we just don't know if we're doing it right, or we just want that support. That's a great place for you to come and to learn and to engage. And then we're constantly trying to put out new content and figure out what folks need in terms of support, so that we can provide that to you in various forms, whether that's the next training or whether that's kind of graphics on our Facebook page. And we do also do a quarterly newsletter where we talk about some of our upcoming events. We give words of inspiration. We have topical blogs like we've talked about, kind of performative versus transformative work. And we talk about this and talk about that. So various things that folks are interested in or that are on our heart, like this next edition, we'll be looking at kind of the disproportionality with autism and those spaces, and how we can have a sharpened analysis to that. And so that's the flyer for our upcoming SHARP community practice meeting. And I'll just go back a little bit and share about some of the resources that we've developed. We developed the SHARP Framework Practitioner Reflection Journal. So version 1 is already available, and version 2 we're working on. So that will be forthcoming, and we'll definitely provide those resources. Sure. So that's just a little bit about kind of what we have going on. But now we will allow
I just wanted to say real quick, the SHARP Reflection Journal is a great tool for those of you who are in the role of supervisors to use within supervision. I actually do a group supervision 3 times per semester that is based around the journal, and incorporated into various pieces of supervision. So for those of you who are either supervisors or receiving supervision, this could be a really helpful place for you.
Right, and there's additional resources that are not even listed on here, like my actual supervisor when I was an intern, and she's thankfully, again, my supervisor coming back to this space, she developed a supervision worksheet that specifically incorporates the SHARP framework so that they can be having conversations, so you can be brainstorming interventions and whatever your job role is, right? And so, yeah, there'll be more to come. Like we said, this is a developing framework. We will send out access to all of these things. We actually, I know you all have a post survey and all of those things. We will also give a survey for today, just so you can give us feedback on how we did in our presentation, questions that you might have, supports that you might need in the future, and then kind of links to those resources that we're discussing right now. But we also want to give you guys a few moments to maybe ask some questions that you might have. So I believe the chat is open, so we will kind of give you some time to maybe say a few things, and Claire and I will jump in as we can. But you know, we have an analysis and we have experience, but we're not experts, so there might be things that, you know, we're still grappling with, or that we want to maybe bring to another community practice meeting to see what other folks have to say about it. So you're welcome to throw some questions out in the chat, and we'll kind of spend some time digging in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Stacey and Claire, you're both amazing, and I am very impressed about how expertly you're handling the chat in this ongoing way. So we typically do Q&A with presenters, but I think you're doing an amazing job of managing the Q&A. So just feel free to maybe answer some questions for the next maybe 7 minutes or so. And then if you want to put your survey in the chat, people can take it, and then we'll put our final post test in at 7:55. I'm just going to mute myself and let you take it back.
Thank you.
If anyone has specific questions, we'd be happy to answer them. I did see one question about pricing of journals and things like that. Our resources are totally free, so there's no cost associated with it. And we're kind of working, we just got an Adobe Pro account that we're trying to figure out how folks can type directly into it instead of maybe having to print the journal. And we hope that it's something that you revisit and you come back to. Same with the SHARP framework. And, you know, it's evolving in its practice, and just over time, we're hoping to see it move. You know, there's the article on the macro MI and how we might be able to infuse a sharpened lens. And so there's definitely so much on to still even be developed and learned. So thank you all for such kind words.
Thank you all.
Really great to be in this space.
And we appreciate you guys for jumping into the chat and sharing so much throughout this, and with vulnerability and just jumping in. So we really appreciate that as well.
Yes.
And we would love to see you. We would love to see you in April.
Yes, please. And we also welcome like contribution as well. Like we consider ourselves a community, right? And you know, right now myself and a PhD student are kind of like managing the facilitation of those meetings, but we hope that in time that we're building leadership, right, of our collective, so people can have voice and bring into their, you know, bring in their ideas. Like we have different contributors for the newsletter, so it's not just my voice and not just Dr. Shaia's voice and things like that. So it doesn't look like we have a ton of questions, but you know, we have at the end a slide that will have our contact information. You're welcome to reach out to us that way. And then, you know, one of the last things we want to just leave you with is some closing thoughts, which is for you to kind of consider and explore beyond today's training, which is, where are you in your personal journey with anti-racist, anti-oppressive social work or human service practice, right? Wherever your job role is. I know we kind of talk a lot from a social worker lens, because that's who we are. But this is being utilized by people across various domains. Like we, as a school, as a university, we have the nursing side, and they've been trained in SHARP practice. We have our policy, like our law judicial side, right? They're being trained in it. So there's definitely, wherever you sit, you know, whatever position you find yourself in, you do have power. You do have an ability to change your approach. You do have, you know, a responsibility to learn more, to improve your practices for your families. And then we also want you all to consider what supports you might need in your next steps and how you will hold yourself accountable to this ongoing work. Because there's things that we should be doing on our own. Maybe that's reading or learning or exploring, but also accountability, right? Having conversations. Last night, you know, a few cohorts of folks I worked with in DSS and this, that, and the other, we had an hour and a half conversation about, you know, just values and ethics and showing up in the work, right? So there has to be an ongoing dialogue. There has to be an ongoing outlet for you to express yourself, to ask questions, to say the wrong things, to be challenged. We have to put ourselves in those spaces. So, I think someone asked about a website. We don't really have a website. We're actually developing one, so that's coming out too. All of it is in the works. So my position was created about like 8 months ago. So we have a long way to go. Oh, I see the Epic website. So they have a website. Follow them. But
that is all happening. There are so many things happening right now.
There are so many things happening. So we'll definitely send out these resources. This is Claire and I's contact information. So if you're interested in like booking a training, you can, you know, email our Sharp inbox. And if you have questions, you can feel free to reach out to me or to Claire. And just truly, we're really appreciative and thankful for each and every one of you for providing the space, for engaging so thoroughly tonight. I know it's late. I know it's, I don't even know what day it is today. It's Wednesday, it's hump day, right? So a lot happens. Oh, go back to the contact side. I certainly can do that. And then I will also put in the chat our survey link, which this would just help us with feedback. And we would love to follow up with you in about 3 to 6 months, just to see how it's sitting with you, right? As you are taking this back to your agencies, as you are integrating this into your personal practice, we'd love to hear more from you. So, you know, we'd love some feedback so we can collect some of those emails and get back to you and keep inviting you into this process. But yeah, so I put that, ours in there. I'll put in the chat again. Our survey, we'd love for you to fill that out. But I think that's all from us. If no one has anything further, then I think we'll
Thank
close
you all
here.
so much. It was so wonderful to be in community
Yes.
and sharing this Zoom room with you guys.
Woo-woo.
Thank you so much.